Greetings and salutations, fellow Densians of the glorious Skaven Under Empire. Today, we are going to revel in the glory of one of the great clans of Skavendom, namely Clan Moulder. And of course, throughout this video, there will be not so much as the slightest speck of pro-Skaven bias. Of that, you may be absolutely assured. Not to mention the sheer decadence of doing 2 fantasy videos in a row, but, well, we have spent a while on Vrak, so I figured it was okay. Plus, I'm going to have to start back up again with the Horus Heresy lore breakdown soon, and those things do take a while. But let us return to the point of this video. Clan Moulder, one of the great clans of Skavendom, and a rather peculiar one as well. One that has managed to turn its peculiarity into a fantastic source of wealth, having made Clan Moulder into one of, if not the single wealthiest clan in the entire Under Empire. And this achievement is made even more impressive when you take into consideration the fact that the clan did not have the best of odds starting out. What was eventually to become modern-day Clan Moulder started out from Skaven blight, alongside many other clans after a small accident that may or may not have almost wiped out the Skaven race. And so, in their infinite wisdom and foresight, the Lords of Decay decreed that the Skaven race was to spread across the world. They were to organize into clans and head out in various directions, so as to ensure that no single over-adventurous experiment might ever threaten to wipe them off the face of the old world again. Each clan heading out from Skaven blight were led by a Grey Seer, and the Grey Seer in charge of what was to become Clan Moulder decided that north was a good direction. That turned out to potentially be less than entirely accurate, as they ran into vast quantities of vile, evil, vicious and violent pinkskins which attempted repeatedly to bash the poor little Skavens' heads in, all for the crimes of raiding a few villages here and there and acquiring the necessities of daily life, and slaves, and loot, and food, and other necessities. Then, the most unfortunate little clan ran into the ocean. This is a problem. Skaven are not fond of water in general, and those Skavens who are fond of water are considered complete and utter moral degenerates, and so crossing this body of water was not much of an option. Heading further eastwards, yet more disgusting pinkskins, and eventually they began running into pinkskins who painted their horses and decorated themselves with feathers, which whistled most uncomfortably when they galloped. This clearly was not a good place to live, and so they headed northwards a bit again. And, wouldn't you know it, yet further fucking pinkskins. You'd think the entire world was infested with the little monsters. However, these were of a slightly more cooperative nature. They too were fond of acquiring the necessities of daily life via beating others to death. And even better, they too shared the Skavens' dislike of the pinkskins to the south. I would most certainly be lying through my teeth if I said that this was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, but at the very least it was something. And frankly, even if the inhabitants were still less than openly friendly, albeit at least to some extent open to trade relations, the Skaven had fallen head over heels for the beauty of the local nature, the majestic nature of the wildlife, 2-headed trolls, chimeras, ogres, and mutated giants, and of course the glistening beauty of the nearby lake Ladogash, almost always covered in a deep layer of ice. I am, of course, once again lying most ferociously and vociferously. The reason why the Skaven stopped is because they came across a huge vein of warpstone, and right atop that beautiful glowing green rock they founded their new city, which was to become known as Hell Pit. Though, mind you, there is some truth in the Skaven appreciating the majesty of the nearby environment. One, there were relatively few pinkskins nearby, a decided bonus. Two, it was an easily defensible position, which no one in their right mind would ever approach. And three, the various majestic creatures wandering around made for excellent experimentation and breeding stock. This was to be the beginning of a beautiful capitalistic venture for Clan Moulder, because already at this early point in Skaven history, they were more than aware of the fascinating effects that warpstone had upon most living creatures, an effect that the Skavens themselves were fairly resistant towards, albeit by no stretch of the imagination immune. The leaders of Clan Moulder then speculated that maybe, just maybe, if they captured some of the nastier creatures wandering across the wastelands and exposed them to vast quantities of freshly mined warpstone, something interesting might happen. And they were correct. The first time they attempted to expose one of the critters they captured to vast quantities of warpstone, it exploded in a shower of gore, guts, and newly grown tentacles. And so, whilst wiping their faces clean of blood, the first generation of breeders and mutators of Clan Moulder deduced that 1. They would have to invent some form of visor, so as to avoid the blood from getting in their eyes, and secondly, maybe they should try less warpstone next time. The road ahead of them was long, hard, and absolutely covered in the sticky, goopy remains of animals that went sploosh. But at long last, Clan Moulder began to see some results. Their mutators grew more experienced. They were able to judge the quantity of warpstone used more expertly, and could therefore prevent many of the animals from instantly going sploosh. This resulted in a short-term famine in Hell Pit, as the previously ever so rich and bountiful stream of squished animals suddenly dried up almost completely. But it was all in the name of progress, and with their hard-won experience and experimentation, the mutators were slowly but surely able to bring into life stable mutations. Slowly at first, very modest mutations, creating giant rats, for example, or creatures specifically designed to devour waste material that even the most desperate Skaven would not consider edible. These early successes were then built upon, improved and refined with yet new strains of stable mutants for the breeders to then take into their vast pits and coax into making the fucky fuck. This ended up being a surprisingly complicated stage of the process, for when you put one large, vicious, violent, and extraordinarily short-tempered beast into a small, enclosed area with another, equally large, vicious, violent, and short-tempered beast, the result of this pairing was often a lack of genitals rubbing on genitals, and instead a short and brutal fight to the death, resulting in the victor eating the vanquished, and not in a sexual way. It turns out that when you mutate creatures specifically with the goal of eradicating all forms of empathy, restraint, and control, whilst enhancing aggression and the creature's capabilities for violence, you also end up complicating the romantic mating procedure. Seems obvious now that we look back at it, but oh well, details. Hindsight 2020 and all that. The point is that entire doctrines and procedures would have to be created for the more brutal creations of Clan Moulder. Luckily, the initial successes were less difficult. It is relatively simple to make a giant rat hump another giant rat. Indeed, getting a giant rat to hump anything at all is hardly a challenge. Ensuring that the male giant rat is humping the female giant rat is slightly more challenging, but can be solved easily enough with good old-fashioned isolation. although it was still necessary to keep Skaven slaves on standby to isolate the two lovers after the act was done, to ensure that Mummy did not eat Daddy, or vice versa. And it was also very important to separate Mummy from the children as quickly as possible, lest Mummy feel peckish. Who would have thought that breeding monsters would be so difficult? And these, of course, were just the small monsters. Giant rats are barely the size of a large and angry pit bull. And whilst it did indeed prove to be a stable stock of mutated monstrosities that were to a fair degree effective in combat, they would hardly make Clan Moulder rich. No, for that they would have to create something far more effective. And after yet more painful, long, arduous years of research, documentation, and breeding experiments, finally, what was to become Clan Moulder's staple product forevermore was born. The Rat Ogre. This absolute crime against nature is a combination of a wide variety of interesting creatures. A little Skaven, a little ogre, a pinch of troll perhaps. The exact combination has long since been lost to history, and genuinely terrible bookkeeping on behalf of the Skaven. But as long as the clan can maintain a strong and stable breeding population, there is no problem, and the clan can continue to produce as many of these little monsters as they wish. Enough even to be a little bit selective in the process. When a rat ogre is born, the ones that show the greatest promise for bloodshed are selected amongst the hordes, and the rest are usually selected by their very own kind for dinner. And when a rat ogre cub, although that is far too cute a word to use for these creatures, has been selected, they are then further enhanced, both chemically via various cocktails designed to increase their bloodthirst and violent capabilities, as well as heightening their reflexes, and mechanically by bolting various weaponry directly onto their flesh. This process also has the added benefits of making the creature in question very, very, very angry. And due to powerful magical and hypnotic safeguards put in place on all of Clan Moulder's creations to ensure that they cannot harm their creators, except for, of course, the occasional accident when one Master Moulder decides that a competitor needs to have a feeding-related mishaps, but by and large, the creatures are not capable of harming their masters. This mental and magical block, in combination with a dire need and wish to harm their masters, also results in the animals becoming quite frustrated. And impotent anger combined with frustration are both excellent emotions when what you are seeking to achieve is a merciless, brutish killing machine that values and appreciates little more than abject violence. Of course, there are a few minor problems with this parenting strategy. It does result in exactly what the Master Moulders wanted, a near uncontrollably vicious killing machine. The problem with this initially was that it was also an indiscriminately vicious, uncontrollable killing machine, which was entirely fine with tearing apart its masters just as much as it was happy with tearing apart the enemies. That is where the whole magical and hypnotical blockers come into effect. That was yet another tool developed by Clan Moulder to control their more uncontrollable creations, because the only other option was to skimp on aggression or killing potential, and that was frankly out of the question. And additionally, Clan Moulder wished to commercialize this product as well. They had had a fair bit of success with the giant rats, both as improvised mounts, as beasts of burden, and of monsters of war. But the rat ogre was set to eclipse all of Clan Moulder's previous successes, both in stability, aggression, and warfaring potential. The problem, of course, was how to domesticate such a creature. With giant rats, it wasn't really all that difficult. They would quite naturally grow obedient to whoever was feeding them, and whoever they knew could inflict the greatest quantity of pain upon them. In other words, the rats would quite simply do whatever got them fed, and what didn't get them whipped. Originally, the idea was that the rat ogres would be controlled in much the same way, except for one small quandary. The rat ogre had been specifically bred for warfare, for frontline combat, as a massive line breaker, and as such, its ability to feel pain had also been almost completely eradicated, and what pain it did feel, well, after having been raised in the deepest, darkest recesses of Clan Moulder's breeding dungeons, pain was no longer a sensation that the creature was all that unfamiliar with. Indeed, it would be not entirely incorrect to say that for a rat ogre, the absence of pain was perhaps an even more unknown experience to the rat ogre than pain itself. This immunity to pain, or at the very least complete and utter nonchalant attitude towards it as merely just another facet of everyday life, meant that it was extraordinarily difficult to chastise a rat ogre with pain. And so, some other way of controlling them would have to be invented. And with their usual brand of malicious cleverness, Clan Moulder came up with the perfect solution: to traumatize the rat ogres as children. You arrive at a point where ideas such as good and evil are no longer relevant, not because they are not necessarily descriptive of the actions being taken, but simply because the words are nowhere near potent enough to describe what's going on. The hypothesis went something like this. If whipping a rat ogre essentially does diddly dick nothing, then that's a problem, because whipping has proven very effective against all of the other creatures, and it is in and of itself an effective means to control creatures, to instill a certain sense of discipline in them, and also respect and obedience in whoever holds the whip. For whoever holds the whip is capable of inflicting pain upon the creature, and therefore is a being worthy of said respect and obedience. It was also remarkably simple. You don't need any kind of in-depth understanding of the rat ogre's biology, its psychology, how it was created, or of breeding or mutation to simply hold a whip, and, if necessary, to whip something. Nice, simple, effective. And so the Clan Moulder would prefer if it remained simple and effective. And that's where the trauma comes in. Whilst whipping a grown rat ogre in essence does absolutely nothing, if you convince the rat ogre from a very early age that there is nothing to be feared more than a whip, then well, problem solved. Even the largest, most hulking of rat ogres, with arrows sticking out of it, with swords impaling its thighs, with slash marks covering its entire body, will whimper in fear and submit meekly at the merest show of a lash. And so, with the rat ogre's last major problem solved, its nasty habit of beating to death and then devouring its masters, it was now an even bigger source of warpstone than the very vein upon which Hellpit was founded. The export of rat ogres, giant rats, and the various other creations of Clan Moulder has made it into one of the richest clans in Skavendom, and has enabled them to expand their capital of Hellpit into a massive multi-tiered capital city, with the Great Pit itself standing in the center, ringed by titanic walls through which the only entrance is a single titanic portal made in the shape of a rat's head. It is inside of these huge walls, riddled with tunnels and warrens, that most of the clan's business is done. Visitors to Hellpit are very rarely allowed inside the city itself. That privilege is reserved only for those who will never leave again, or those who are particularly valued guests. And the difference between the two can often be quite inconsequential. And speaking of the city, it is divided into 9 layers, going ever downwards into the Great Pit in the center of it all. The 9 layers of hell. Pit. Not the most subtle of metaphors, but certainly fitting. The layers are filled with experimentation yards, feast halls, domiciles, slave pits, gladiatorial arenas, containment chambers, and the personal palaces/laboratories of the clan's masters. And there are also the more focused and specialized levels. The fourth level is a treasury, in which unimaginable quantities of gold and warpstone are piled up high in literal mountains. The sixth is the one where those marked for the most torturous of punishments are sent, where they are exposed to horrors that could only ever be dreamt up by the twisted minds of the most sick and disgusting of the master moulders, and I truly mean that. In fact, the sadistic expertise of the clan is held in such high regard that chieftains and leaders come from far and wide, even outside of the Skaven race, to bring with them those members of their entourage or courts that they have deemed deserving of special punishment, the likes of which only Clan Moulder could ever truly deliver. Say, for example, that a Norscan warlord had a disloyal advisor whose actions cost him a vital battle. An unforgivable crime for which death is far too mild a punishment, but perhaps flesh-crafting said advisor into a living toilet might be just the thing. Or what about a rug that can slither itself from room to room on bleeding exposed tentacles, whilst constantly letting out a most delectable high-pitched whine of pain? The master moulders themselves are very fond of this art in particular, living in quite literally living mansions, with the very walls squirm with constant pulsating motions, and their every need is attended to by servants who are, quite literally, one with the furniture. Indeed, Hellpit sounds like a wonderful place to vacation, if you are utterly and completely stark raving mad. And also evil. But hey, no shame in catering to a niche market, I should know. And Clan Moulder most certainly also caters to a fair bit of a niche, specializing, of course, primarily in beasts of war, although that is not the only thing they do. As I mentioned previously with the giant rats, there are those who use them as beasts of burden as well. And such utilitarian pursuits are also catered to by Clan Moulder. For example, the wolf rat is an excellent hunter and tracker, whilst their colossal burrowing beasts can dig out entire tunnel complexes complete with massive warrens in mere days, tasks that would take thousands of slaves months if not years to complete. But of course, just like in our own world, there are very few ventures that pay better than military ones. And Clan Moulder is of course most aware of this. They are also aware of the fact that there are many who are jealous of their vast riches and their knowledge. Jealous parties that will stop at absolutely nothing to wrest Clan Moulder's hard-earned cash and secrets away from them. And so the clan ensures that they always keep the biggest and the nastiest of their creations for their own armies. Although, frankly, the term army may not be correct when speaking about the forces of Clan Moulder. Vast, magnificent hordes may be a more descriptive term to use. When Clan Moulder goes to war, the more traditional types of vermin units like clan rats and storm vermin are used as rear-line support units, or to hold objectives that the more unpredictable forces of the clan might simply decide to abandon if they see something tasty wandering around nearby, whilst the bulk of the army is made up of literal waves of mutated monsters, and ahead of the main charge there will run a tremendous living tide of giant rats, intended both to overwhelm the enemy scouts and skirmishers, as well as soaking up any and all firepower that the enemy may feel so cooperative as to waste on these most expendable of expendable critters. And once the enemy's ammunition has been well and truly drained, the main force will come in behind the giant rats, a literal wall of towering, muscled monsters made up of rat ogres, hell pit abominations, and all the various experiments dragged from the deepest recesses of hell pit. Such a terrifying, nightmarish host is enough to make even the most hardened of enemies quake and flee before them. When masses of Chaos Beastmen and Warriors of Norsca invaded Hellpit during the Storm of Chaos, they only made it as far as the 3rd level, where they were literally drowned in a gargantuan tide of monsters who hurled them back out of the city of Hellpit in a typhoon of bloodletting into the plains beyond, where they were hunted down one by ravenous packs of wolf rats. The slaughter was on such an epic scale that it took weeks for the halls of a Hellpit to once again be cleaned. Eaten clean, most likely. And it is only then, behind the giant rats and behind the monsters, that the Skaven come. First, the Packmasters, driving the hordes forward and capturing those unlucky enough to still be alive to replenish the armies of Hellpit. And then the clan rats, driven forward by the storm vermins to overwhelm any remaining pockets of resistance that miraculously have weathered the first storm, or to hold any areas of strategic significance. Alternatively, they are simply used as yet more bodies with which to drag away the most unfortunate captives. There are very few in the Warhammer world that can stand against a fully massed war host of Clan Moulder. Hell, even Grimgor Ironhide, the most unstoppable orc there ever was, the bearer of the greatest quantity of plot armor in fantasy history, was eventually stopped and forced to turn back by the unending masses of Moulder monsters. So, if you're in the market for a new pet, or maybe a footstool that screams and cries as it tries to escape, maybe you should give Hellpit a visit, although I recommend staying in the wall section, because no matter how fascinating the lower areas may be, in a deranged sense, the best part of visiting Hellpit is of course leaving, and you can only do that, realistically, if you stay in the walls. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.